We'd like to welcome you to Writings on the Wall, a public reading and presentation of literature and artwork featured in the 2013 edition of Wall Literary Journal. I'm Professor Gina Schaefer, and this is Professor Amy Castle. We served as faculty advisors for this year's issue. As the campus literary magazine, Wall is devoted to showcasing the literary and artistic talents of students here at Saddleback. Now in its 13th year, the journal is published annually and distributed on campus in the fall semester.
This year's Wall is a beautiful tribute not only to the students whose works are featured on these pages, it's also a testimony to the immensely talented students who served on the staff this past spring. They were involved in reviewing and selecting student submissions, layout, design, editing, proofreading, and publicity. Last year's edition of Wall received a first place award in a national competition among campus magazines sponsored by the American Scholastic Press Association.
Our Wall has a solid foundation in the form of administrators, faculty members, campus staff, and community contributors who lend their support to the publication. I'd like to acknowledge some of those supporters who are in attendance this evening. Please stand when I call your name. Dr. Kevin O'Connor, Dean of the Liberal Arts Division. Jennifer Hedgecock, Professor of English. Shelley Banga, Professor of English. And I don't know if they were able to make it. Haver Akhtar and Giselle Leftwich of the Liberal Arts Division.
I see Haver.
Okay. Thank you for your support.
Our lineup of readers and presenters this evening offers a diverse range of artistic styles and subjects ranging from the sentimental to the sinister, from the comical to the catastrophic. You'll note in the program that we've listed the page numbers for each work. Please feel free to follow along as our authors and artists read excerpts from their work and discuss the creative inspiration behind their fantastic, wonderful, amazing talent. In order to accommodate an assortment of works, we have limited each piece to 5 minutes, so only a portion of some works will be read. In that case, you're encouraged to finish what we have started here.
Just to the readers and presenters, because of the 5-minute time limit, if we find that you're going over a little bit, I'll be shaking a maraca, so that's your cue to start wrapping up. All speakers and presenters, please come to the middle to deliver your information. Now, you've seen her image on the cover of Wall and on posters throughout the campus. You might wonder, who is this mystery woman in the wall, whose face we never see? Well, it's none other than the artist who snapped this captivating image of herself digitally silhouetted among castle walls in Syria. I'm pleased to introduce Iman Moujtahed.
Hello. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and to have been chosen for the cover image. I basically, it's a self-portrait as far as like me. I shot myself with a camera, and then I took that image and used it kind of like as a stock image as I would with any other person. I do photo manipulations, and I turned it into just that, a photo manipulation, which included some photos that I had taken when I was in Syria, which were those arches. It's from an ancient castle called the Castle of the Knights. As far as the corset that I was wearing, I made that corset by hand through the corset class taught here at Saddleback with my professor Laura Bonzel. Like in the background of the image, you'll see there's like writing that you can't really read if you look really closely at the bricks. It's kind of like etched into the wall. You can't read it, and I did that purposely because it was actually extremely personal poetry that I had written myself. So that's my poetry on there, and I made it illegible. but you can still tell it's writing. So it's a conceptual, emotional piece, fantasy obviously incorporated in it, and this is the skirt I was wearing. I know Professor Schaefer wanted me to kind of like reenact it and then like turn around and show exactly the same. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Iman. That was incredible. Our next piece will be read by Adrian Cross, The Victorians.
Well, first of all, we're proof positive that the humanities is not a wicked stepchild of the STEM majors, because we have all these fabulous artists with us tonight. And I'm proud to have shared the wall setting with a fantastic artist who has depicted a homeless person. And funnily enough, there's one in my poem. The Victorians. They line the sidewalks proudly, dressed in pubescent watercolors. Their chalk-colored shadows create long velvet streaks in the lime-spotted trees. The trees seem to magically shed their leaves like haunted rain. While this may be an illusion of both sight and sound, illusions are, after all, only peripheral in nature and tend to vanish like fireflies. The hard, wintry branches of the trees scrape against the darkened window panes, which are the homes of black widows, both human and insect. A solitary homeless man curses as he stumbles down the oily black streets. He curses softly as he passes by an occasional lighted window, a scant harbinger of warmth. In the fetid alley nearby, a vile striped cat hisses, arching his thin back in the rain. High on the roof, a brass weather vane slowly levitates, first north, then south, to and fro, aimless as a broken wing. Only the reckless and the homeless are out on this frigid night. The San Francisco fog, arriving on time, embraces the painted ladies in petticoats, standing rigidly on the hill. Its turgid, cold fingers soon curl about round them with a sigh. Rather than go on and on about my background for the next 3 minutes, I prefer to speak in some more words, and I'm going to speak in 2 seasonal poems, brief ones. Autumn. The leaves are a kaleidoscope of ambers and reds. The fog is the sun, masquerading as a gremlin. Cool air pricks the hard surface of the earth. A moonstone becomes a monotone, awash in purple haze. Silver slivers of sunlight form prisms from raindrops. Blackbirds cluster in packs, wearing witches' frocks. The moon is an interloper in midnight blue. Halloween night. Halloween night, incandescent isle of light. Black cat's eyes caramelize, then marbleize in the night. Witches' crews stir witches' brews beneath orange hues of flickering light. The mournful cries, the inhuman sighs, vaporize in mid-flight. Halloween night, unholiest of unholy nights. Your ancient tombs and fetid ruins stand waiting for the light. Skeletal patrols caress silent knolls 'neath the shadowy bowl of moonlight. Halloween night, unrepentant earl of fright. Fly like a troll, shriek like a kite. Elevate my soul to an earthly height. Then let me drift down to earth after just one flight.
Our next author is Amy Cameron, whose short story is titled A Light Alone.
Thank you, Professor. Just a little bit about myself. I recently went back to school for creative writing, and I'm going to read an excerpt from my short story right now, A Light Alone. It's the story of an old man named Frank who's having a hard time finding his place in the changing world. And I'll be reading the last part of the story. It won't give you a complete sense of Frank's life, just a bit of his struggle to stay relevant. Daylight was beginning to fade when the young man returned to his car. The cocky twist of his mouth straightened out as he noticed a white slip of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. "You called the cops on me?" he yelled up at Frank, who waited at an ancient beach chair on his front porch. Frank watched with satisfaction as the young man tore the parking ticket from the wiper blade and glared at it, his color rising. "I told you not to park in my handicap spot." $380. Are you kidding me?" the man roared, charging a few paces across the narrow city sidewalk towards the steps leading up to Frank's porch. Frank tensed in his chair. "You broke the law. It's not my fault. I told you not to park there, and you ignored me. Now you can't ignore that ticket." "Like you even had somewhere to go," the kid said through clenched teeth. Frank's neck throbbed with his accelerated heartbeat as he watched the guy's fists clench, thick arm muscles bunching under colorful tattoos as the young man mounted the porch stairs 2 at a time. Sweat dripped into Frank's left eye, stinging it, burning it. A sharp pain ripped through Frank's chest. His tongue felt heavy and thick, making it difficult to speak. "As if you ever had anywhere to go, do you, old man? And that bastard would have docked my pay if I was late again this morning. But you don't give a shit about that. You don't care about anything except that goddamn parking spot." The young man stalked across the porch to within arm's reach when Frank slumped sideways out of his chair, tipping it over and knocking his head against the concrete floor. A fire truck responded to the 911 call. Firefighters found the emergency contact information in Frank's wallet, and his son Anthony arrived as Frank was regaining consciousness. "Dad, are you okay?" Anthony kneeled over Frank, squeezing his hand. Frank's eyes moved from his son to the firefighters standing on his porch. "What happened?" "You're going to be just fine, Mr. Metello," a firefighter answered. "Looks like you fell out of your chair there and hit your head. You were out a few minutes, but we took your vitals and everything looks good. It was just a little anxiety attack." "So I didn't have a heart attack, Anthony? Where's Mom? Does she know yet?" "No, Dad, not a heart attack. Everything's going to be okay." "Where's Mom? I need to tell her I'm all right." "Dad, Go inside and get your mother right now," Frank snapped. "She must be worried sick." "Dad, Anthony blew out a long breath and looked away. He raked a hand through his hair. "Dad, you know, Mom isn't in the house." The firefighters were packing up to go, but they all stopped and turned towards Anthony. The tattooed young man sitting on the porch steps lifted his head and stared at him too. Frank looked up at his son, his muddled yellow eyes wide and wet with tears. "But I remember. I called 911. I thought—" "But she was still warm, Anthony." Frank's voice broke. His frail body began to shake as his son wrapped his arms around him. "It's okay, Dad. I know." After a moment, a firefighter cleared his throat. "Mr. Metello, we called your doctor, and he's going to stop by early tomorrow morning to check on you. We don't think you have to go to the ER right now. Everyone would like to avoid putting you through all that. You understand?" "All right, that's fine." Frank sat up and noticed the young man sitting slumped over on the steps. Dirty hands twisted into greasy hair, his elbows on his knees. He was staring straight down at nothing. Anthony helped his father to his feet, and they made their way into the house. Frank woke up 2 hours later, not hungry for dinner. The room was dark, the only light coming from the television. A commercial was on, blaring loudly, and Frank groped for the remote control on the little side table next to his chair, but couldn't find it. God damn that woman. She doesn't even watch TV. Why is she always touching the remote? Frank turned on a lamp and heaved himself off his chair to look around the empty room. He saw the remote control on the sofa and hobbled over to get it. On the way back to his chair, he noticed the time on the little wooden clock they had gotten 60 years ago as a wedding present. Its face was cracked from being knocked to the floor half a dozen times over the years, but it worked fine. Frank would often say it worked better, in fact, than the newer timepieces they had. 8:30. I'll bet she's already gone to bed now, too, Frank said, and blew out a long breath as he stared at the clock, not moving. Then he turned and dropped heavily back into his seat. The end.
Our next presenter is Fatima Ayuki, who'll be reading Judge Shalomson and my garbled English.
Hi everybody. I'm a little different from all the students in Saddleback College. I'm Iranian. I'm survivor from the political prison that I was tortured by the electric shock. I lost my memory, and when I came to America, I was broken, I was disabled, and American and Saddleback College again boost me up to find my life. And this is the Saddleback College after they work for me from Mrs. Roney, the first class that I have 2003 in this school, to Wall class with Professor Sheffer. So after this years, again, I found my memory and write this book, The Silence of Clamor, that is about the women in Iran that is under the pressure. They lost the children, they lost husbands, they lost boy, they lost girl, and they are very sad. Okay, and my essay in this wall is Judge Salamson and my garbled English. Just I read some of the passage from this book. Just I tell you, when as a immigration foreign people come to America, you have very different vision. So I tried explain and dramatize this site. It is now 3 months since I have been in America. A dream comes true, but too late. It seems like a dream of heaven, but you have to die first. If you want to go to heaven, first you have to die. I can see your smile, but let me explain, because there is a tragic behind this story. Most Iranians are against the religious fascists. So in order to save their life, they run away from the hell that the mullahs, a humble name for the government leader, have made for them. They go to the borderlines country to apply for American visa, but they are often denied and returned back home. Unfortunately, when they come back, they will be arrested and tortured or executed. Sometimes those that are tortured will have another chance to go out of the country, and this time they will receive an American visa. That I did. Let's go back a little. I don't read them because it's too much for you. In immigration, so when you come to the America, you have to go to the immigration court. So we are talking about immigration court. In immigration court in Los Angeles, after I passed the security line, I went to the courtroom. The room was almost full of the people whose dream has come true like me. They were from different countries. I looked for my attorney. She was sitting in the first row of the benches. This part is separated by the wooden gate from the other part. Exactly at 9 o'clock, the door on the right side of the room was open. The first two women in the formal dress, then the judge with a black robe came in. He was a tall, thin man with a trusty face. I stood up and my attorney followed. When I looked around, no one stood up, just us without the judges attention to me. Where did she come from? Judge Shalemstein asked my attorney. It was interested and different from the courts that I saw in the American movie. He knew my attorney and they had talked informally on many occasions. She answered that I was from Iran. He sat in his chair and started to work with the folders that were on top of each other, higher than his head. Then he chose one of them. Fat Mim A E O E. He read the name. I looked at the people to see who had this strange name, but nobody answered. My attorney answered and stood up. I was surprised that he called my name. The judge had already read my case and wanted to know why I needed a translator when I claimed to have graduated with a degree in English literature. Before I could answer, my attorney explained that I was a political prisoner in Iran and I was tortured by the electric shock. The effect impacted my brain was damaged and I lost 80% of my memory. Then she added that the doctor proof was included. When I was explaining these things, suddenly, objection, Your Honor, came from the woman who was sitting on my attorney's left side, the government attorney. I looked at her with surprise. How could my English be an objection for her? But as she continued, she was not involved with that was going on the court. She explained that she was looking at the copy of my passport because I had traveled to many countries. I had to translate all stamped in my country, in my passport. She wanted to know where I traveled before I come to the US. We lost a argument on the previous subject. That means she stopped us. So the judge turned to the new subject. Then I looked at the stamps on my passport. Each stamp was a circle that half of that was written the local language and the half of that was in English. But she didn't look at the English that was on the... Anyway, let me go to end of the... Did you have plan to... Anyway, let me tell you, when I start talking about my situation, Judge was crying. All his face was triggering and eyes was full of tears. She couldn't handle this problem with Iranian woman. So he wanna try the subject. He told me, did you have plan to marry with the gentleman that I was see the last time? The judge asked me. In America, an easiest way to get a green card is by marriage. Did you know it? Because I was shocking remembering all of this horrible event. His change of the subject gave me a chance to take a break from this emotional testimony. I answered by saying that I had asked him for marriage, but he told me that you have to be a resident in US. So he suggested that I go to the so he suggested me to go to the immigration court to receive a green card, and then we married. Now I have come here for a green card, and you tell me I should go get married to receive a green card. I replied, Your Honor, how can my broken mind solve this paradox? First the judge, then everybody else started laughing. You are right. So today, in this court, your paradox will be solved. Judge Shalamsan said, congratulations, welcome to America. Sorry, on second language.
Our next presenter is Shannon Renz, who did the illustration for a short story by Ryan Van. And the story itself, Ryan could not be here, but it's a mystery story, very suspenseful story about this house that has a dark passageway with these objects, including an orange and a notebook.
So the stairs were really the most prominent feature in the story, and I really wanted to display that in my image. I liked how the orange, the notebook, and the reader all got wrapped up in the stairs, and I wanted to show that literally. So with the orange skin, it turned into the stairs wrapping around, and with the notebook, it was the pages coming out. The stairs turn round and round, just like the reader's mind, wondering, which way do I go? What should I do? The doorway, slightly open on the bottom, invites the reader to open the door, unlock the mystery of the stairs. However, it doesn't really show you the answer. The story doesn't tell you the answer. It ends on a question. And so you have to decide the answer for yourself. And that was my favorite part. I loved that about the story. And I actually got really excited getting a chance to draw for this. So that's really what I wanted to focus on, is the mystery in your mind turning round and round. That's it.
Our next presenter is Ken Karandang, and his story, First Person Shooter. And I gave Mr. Karandang quite a hard time about this story.
Hi, my name's Ken, and my story has to do with drone warfare. I had an idea that eventually, I saw a documentary about drone warfare, and I saw that the way the drone pilot would sit down in front of this computer, and there was a keyboard in front of him, and there's a joystick, and it really looked similar to a video game. So I had this idea that maybe eventually in the future our technology would progress to the point where video games and drone warfare would sort of be synonymous. Like if you guys might know someone who plays a video game called Call of Duty, it's basically like you have this guy on the screen and he runs around shooting people. Well, I thought maybe we might have drones that are robots like that, and someone could be thousands of miles away controlling a drone like this with a video game controller. And so I wanted to write a story about that, but eventually it became more of a story that was, it was a story about what a drone pilot has to go through. I once read that even though the drone pilots aren't actually in the war zone, that they still suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. So without further ado, I'm going to read part of my story. Sensing his presence, the lights turned on as he entered. He sat in a padded chair in front of an array of black screens and put on a headset. Within arm's reach, a single controller lay on a pedestal ahead of him. Its white plastic casing was molded so it would fit into 2 palms comfortably. In the place where the thumbs would naturally be lay 2 analog sticks for movement and aiming controls, as well as a few buttons that were positioned within reach. On the back was a red button that emulated the trigger of a gun, placed there for the index finger. Jackson took the controller and placed it in the correct position in his hands, and the screens blinked to life. A voice spoke through the headset. Private Arthur Jackson, SAID controller, identification number 03813. Please confirm. Affirmative, Private Jackson. Affirmative. Private Jackson 03813 on standby. Mission starting in 5, 4, 3, 2. The semi-autonomous infantry drone, also known as SAID, was birthed out of the most classified niches of both military and science. It stood at a mere 5 feet tall and weighed about as much as an adolescent. However, its stature was quite deceiving. Beneath its Kevlar-enforced exterior was a network of carbon nanotube muscle fibers that gave this small android superhuman strength and speed. This function was, however, just for convenience's sake. It was equipped with a silenced submachine gun and an autonomous computer that bestowed it flawless aim, accomplishing the drone's true function. A fierce sandstorm blotted out the light from the sun and shrouded the earth in red. In the middle of this pandemonium, the drone stood, apparently lifeless, but its vessels of wire were charged with energy. Then it received its commands. The artificial muscles in its legs flexed abruptly, and the drone bolted forward at inhuman speed. Soon, a magnificent mansion appeared behind the barricade of a brick wall. Using its autonomous computer, the drone calculated the dimensions of the wall. Scaling the wall, it landed on the other side, its legs emitting a pneumatic sigh. Then it sped off toward the mansion. Thank you.
Next is Toy Soldiers, a poem by Kyle Cabrera. Kyle will briefly introduce himself, and then the poem will be presented in an oral interpretation by Melissa Armstrong.
Hi, my name is Kyle Cabrera. I typically don't write poetry. I find it extremely difficult to convey a particular message with so few words. And if I do write poetry, I usually discard it. However, with this particular poem titled Toy Soldiers, I felt that I was adequately able to express my views on war and the politics involved. So I'm very excited to hear Melissa Armstrong's oral interpretation of this poem. So without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to her. Thank you.
When I was just a little child, a box of army men compiled. They marched outside into the dirt. I would go to war for sport. A hammer made them into ruins, their bodies looking mostly human. A weed whacker spun to bend their form. Their humanity now looked lukewarm. The nails pierced punctures through the men, their voices screaming in my head. Fireworks strewn them like confetti, my face and palms becoming sweaty. A knife cut off their arms and legs. The men inside my head now begged. A match melted them into the mud. My eyes could now see wax green blood. Pliers squished their heads and bodies. Now my humanity was rotting. Screws fell like missiles from the sky. I couldn't help but watch them die. Formations doused in gasoline. I prayed to Mary Magdalene. When I was done, I couldn't breathe. I ran inside to watch TV. The toys still mutilated in the dirt. Now I look as an adult. Out my window where I was sighed, where the towers stood beside. I watch the news and Congress speaks and reminisce the after weeks. And I wonder if they ever played with army men or green brigades. If Congress had toys, his or hers. I mean when they were kids, that is.
Our next presenter is Annie Perez, and her beautiful photograph, Life Pushes Hard.
Hello, good evening. Hopefully everyone's doing well tonight. It was a Sunday early morning. I woke up around 8 o'clock and my mother was in the kitchen cooking us breakfast. I was flipping through the channels and I forget what channel it stopped on, but it was Joel Osteen, the pastor, and he was preaching and giving his sermon. And my mom calls me into the kitchen and she tells me to eat breakfast. And in the background, I could hear him preaching words. And at this time, I was going through a phase in my own life. I was analyzing where I wanted to go and the dreams and desires that I had for myself. And I heard him saying, life pushes hard. And it stood out to me and it echoed as my mom and I were eating. And that relayed and gave me the title to my photograph. And I wanted to share with you my inspirations and also the steps that I took in order to take this photograph. So if you can look at the photograph, you see that the inspiration behind it really is that, for me at least, I felt like anybody could be in this situation. I became aware of it because I would see Matt, that's who's in the photograph, every morning before I went to school and every evening as I was coming back home from work. And I saw him probably for about good 7 to 8 months every day. And it came to my aware that I could be like that. And I needed to start making the right decisions in my personal life and succeed in the goals that I had for myself. So the steps that I did in order to take this photograph, it was pretty scary because I'm a woman and I was approaching a man that I didn't know who he was or what kind of mentality that he was gonna give back to me. So I approached him. I asked him if I could take his photograph. He agreed and said yes. He actually murmured a little bit. I didn't understand. And I asked him what his name was, and he said Matt. And he told me his last name, but I thought it was rude if I would ask him, can you repeat yourself? So I ran across the street, and it was a main street, and he is on one side over the train tracks on top, and I went on the other side, and it's 2 main streets. So I went in the middle divider. I threw myself on the ground and started taking pictures, and he didn't do anything for the first 50 frames that I took. And I said, wow, this is a waste of my time. I guess maybe I should move on. But as I thought that, he stood up, he put his hand in his bag and took out bread, started drinking, and that was the moment that I just shot out into the front of the street, threw myself on the pavement. Cars were coming towards me, and I could hear them at a distance honking. And I said, I don't care, I have to take this picture. I took it maybe 3, 4 times, and I said, I got it. And I leaped up, jumped on the other side where he was at, and he just stared at me and just laid right back down. And the cars were like honking and yelling at me to get out of the way, leave the old man alone. And I approached him and I told him, Matt, thank you so much. If I make it into the wall journal for my college, I'll come back and celebrate with you. A couple of months later, I received the email that I was placed. I stopped by, I told him what he wanted, and he said he doesn't need anything, of course. And I said, I don't care what you say, I'm gonna bring you something. I went to the store, bought him some cookies, some Coca-Cola, some baby wipes, and a beanie because it was cold during that winter. And this is actually the only photo and memory that I do have of him. After that, a week later, he vanished, and I don't know where he's at. And that's all I have. Thank you. I'm honored to be here and for you to listen to me.
Our next piece is a poem titled Keeping Tied Up by India Diggs. It will be presented in oral interpretation by Julia Flynn.
Hi, I'm India Diggs. First, I just wanted to say thank you to Julia. We've never met before. Awesome. Actually, we have met before now. I know you. So, cool. So, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do that. It's really awesome. I'm really flattered. So, thank you so much. Thank you to Wall for placing me in here. This is kind of my first time sharing my work with anybody because it's pretty personal. So, but I guess my main message in the poetry I write, it pretty much all writes itself. I can't really tell you why I'm inspired or how it comes to be. It just does. But my message is that it's okay to be sad to anybody who goes through anything like that. It's not something to be ashamed of. And so I guess I'll let her come up and do that. Thank you so much.
It got easier to panic, paint spilling on the rug. It all comes out at once with little to spare. Until I said the words, I wasn't aware that they existed. Deep breath, more to come. Inhale, inherently twisted. I want this person, all the flaws, the frustration, the waiting, this person with the deep blue sea in his eyes, and the hope of a child. But I cannot stop the inevitable feelings that sink like dust on the coffee table. I want to bathe you in sunshine, and you want to soak in the rain. I will dry you with my rays, but you will drown me all the same. But I won't give up on you. But if I can't say what's on my mind, it will end up on my skin, scratched in. I will end up in the ground. But I want this. I want this right now. And in all my rational thought, I couldn't find one without you in it. Your name is branded on my brain, and your face is in the deepest of my sleeps. I could never rid myself of such a beautiful disaster, and so I let it sing. I let us drown each other in the dry heat. I could never let go of what makes my heart beat, beat, beat.
Okay, our next presenter is Lorraine Sears. And she'll be reading an essay, Sin by Silence, The Chains That Bind.
Hi, everybody. My name's Lorraine Sears, and I want to thank you, Gina, for producing my story. I'm super nervous. I had it all prepared, and now it's all gone to shit in a handbasket. So I had something prepared to say, and it's gone, so I'll just speak the truth. I want to thank my sister for coming. I haven't cried about the story. Now I'm going to cry. I know this is hard for you to hear, but thank you for coming. Okay, the story is about rape, and more importantly, about redemption. And I'll preface it with 12 and a half years ago, I stopped crying, and today I'm crying. Go figure. And I cried out for help, and this is a story about doing just that. It's called Sin by Silence, The Chains That Bind, and in fact, they do. Never telling was an unspoken rule in my house, or rather of my upbringing, which ultimately led to the loss of my childhood. He knew too I would not tell. Silence permitted him to sin. He leads me to a grassy area at the Santa Ana Zoo where he gives me drugs. Then he covertly brings me to a motel where he takes me into a darkened room. A luminous glow sheds light on the dark figure in the corner. A faceless man with squared shoulders, perched in a similarly square chair. An explosion of fear erupts from within me as I'm made to sit on the bed's edge, facing not the men, but the television. I see now what has been casting shadows across the room, a young girl in a snuff film. I gasp as I grasp my fate. It is a very dark day when one prays only for rape. Sorry. Someone has taken hold of my shoulders. His head darts left to see the darkest. My head darts left to see that the darkest of the men has hold of me, while the lighter one steps from the corner into view. He approaches, steps past me, and hurriedly heads for the door. I too rise and follow. I grab his arm, but I'm shaken loose. My escape is thwarted, while his is not. I have, however, taken flight from reality. I am catatonic. I do not fight, and I do what I'm asked of this very dark man. I feed his frenzy, quench his thirst, and sustain his hunger, so ravenous it's criminal. He's extraordinarily heavy atop me. I smell him, taste him, his dark skin swelling with sweat, pungent, dense, and vile. He clutches my throat as he climaxes. I am not afraid of his violent acts or living by his violent acts. I'm afraid of dying by them and leaving those who love me disgraced by the circumstance and brutality of my death. I await my maker to meet me, to touch me, to release me, and he does in a sense. The man's crude hands are loosened. My neck is free from his grip, and my vision returns. What I see is a sinister grimace. He acts graciously as I've given him a gift, my innocence, my dignity, my honor. I dress slowly, hypnotically. I'm led through the door and over to the parking lot in full view. I'm no longer a secret, nothing to be curious about. I am damaged, worth far less than this morning, worth only a bean discarded. I might not have met the same demise as a young girl in that film, but I feel no loneliness greater, no depth of despair deeper. I am the walking dead. I go home and try to forget, pretend that I'm okay. He phones daily, taunting me, torturing me. Finally, I mustered the courage to tell him I'll report his rape should he ever call again. He laughs and hangs up. I look to my parents who are sitting 2 feet away, and they pretend that I'm okay. In silence, the room recedes. The bright day turns dark, and I fall away to the welcoming warmth of dejection, where I reside for the next 20 years, a victim blameworthy of another's crime. I'm anxious, nervous, full of anger and fear. Depression does not elude me. I'm riddled with guilt, shame, and lacking any worth. My senses are alive, yet I wish they were dead. The taste and smell of sweat sickens me. The sight of darkened rooms and sly smiles alarm me, and the sound of deep voices frighten me. A rough touch makes me recoil. Anyone sneaking up on me is startling and elicits horrific photographic memories. At age 34, with the dissolution of a 16-year marriage, I find that alcohol offers some relief. It is first comforting and soothing, then powerful and problematic, and ultimately insidious and demoralizing. It is mean, menacing, and maniacal, much like the man from so long ago. I'm no longer relieved, but I'm reliving the trauma. I do not function well. My life has become unmanageable. My two teenage children are suffering the effects of my behavior. They are being victimized by their mother's alcoholism. By no fault of their own, they too are experiencing trauma that they are not responsible for or guilty of. In desperation, I stop crying and I cry out for help. I will no longer be silenced, nor will I allow my children the same legacy. So you see, had I not become an alcoholic, I might never have found my voice, enabling me treatment for my alcoholism and the underlying symptoms of trauma. With thorough and prolonged care and management, I found a path to recovery. Traded humiliation for humility, replaced judgment for discernment. Learned that forgiveness freed me of victimization and secured me as a survivor. I became an advocate and a liaison for those suffering from addiction and sexual trauma alike, and most importantly, released my children and myself from our binding chains. Not very long ago, I drove by that zoo and the motel. There were no shadows or dark figures to be fearful of, no memories too horrid to escape. Yet I gasped as I grasped how this experience was undeniably a sin by silence that needs by rule to be spoken.
Our next piece is a short story by Kenny Murphy, Jed Fell in the Fish Tank.
I just want to start out by saying thank you to everybody who put this thing together. I'm very humbled to be a part of this, and thanks again for coming out, everybody. So this is my short story. It's the first one I wrote. It's really my first experimentation with creative writing, and I've actually grown to really like it, and I'm pursuing a degree in English, so with an emphasis in creative writing. So this is a story about a very grumpy fish who lives in an aquarium. He's a barracuda, to be exact, and I'm going to read you a little bit here. Our tank was right across the exhibit from the biggest in the opening hall of the aquarium. This thing was a giant, to say the least. Sure, people paid their respects, and the fans were always cordial to the crew and I, but to be completely honest with you, we had nothing on the tank across the way. It was the centerpiece of the whole place, a show stealer. My school and I sat in the shadows, forehead on fin, in disgust, and a little bit of jealousy ran through the filtered water of our tank. We knew that we would probably we're never going to have the spotlight of the aquarium unless some miracle happened. It might not be a big deal to you, but we Barracuda aren't much privy to coming in second place, especially not to a bunch of colorful, stuck-up gill heads in the tank across. We had come up with many last-ditch efforts to win over the crowd. We choreographed dance routines, but the lack of music didn't help the rhythm. My poor cousin Eddie was willing to put together a few jokes for a set, but because of the damn thick glass, the crowd couldn't hear a thing. It's a shame, too, because he had even had material on the mediocrity of aquarium food. Alas, we sat in defeat over the unsung attempts we had to win over the fish enthusiasts. I guess it's not that all that bad here in the main hall, though. My buddy Vinny, the tiger shark, has his tank over by the daycare center. He's been complaining and filed a request to get transferred over by the angelfish. I don't blame him. Imagine a bunch of little humans grabbing your fins all day long. But still, he can daydream about those gorgeous angelfish that, between you and me, are definitely out of his league. Thanks, everybody.
Next, we have a poem by Michaela Moore. Michaela, are you here? She's not here. With the oral interpretation by Larry Radden. Thank you, Larry.
There's nothing so sad as the little girl that looks at me with those big doe eyes and the eager smile as she explains to me what a lockdown is. How she hides under the teacher's big oak desk or the cloak closet just in case the bad man with the guns comes to visit and wreaks terror and bloodshed. How she doesn't understand it's not a game of hide and seek, because if caught by the bad man, she'll never see 6 or 7 or prom. Her teacher might try to save her while the white light turns red with arsenal blood. Her teacher might fail, then murder could prevail. And we'd give candles and teddy bears to her funeral and grave. But I can't imagine this sweet little girl dead on the floor with a hole in her head, leaking her sweetness and smiles and giggles out on the carpet in a sticky puddle of red. The girl who squeals at every joke, who tries to tickle my tummy and my toes. The girl whose smile lights up the whole world and will try anything if she can just wiggle. But the bad men make her practice running and hiding and dying. And because she's only 5, the joke of death, it makes her smile.
Unfortunately, our next presenter, Mert Norgren, could not make it this evening. She took this photograph, and she is also the student who served as the graphic designer and art and layout editor for Wall. So her handiwork resulted in a beautiful finished product. So our next presentation is the poem Deceiving Beauty by Christian Zimmer. Christian, are you here? Okay. Unfortunately, Christian isn't here, but the poem will be read in oral interpretation by Alex Sherwood.
Deceit springs to life in fatal attraction, conquers all obstacles of misled satisfaction, sums up the whole with antagonizing fractions, swallows focus with a seductive aroma of distractions, suffocates the mind with a lack of swift action, diffuses the heart when the time bomb nears reaction. The heart dwells inside with enhanced disguise, holds secrets within that lie before true eyes, crumbles before beauty and physical signs, lusts from the wellspring of devious lies, hunts for true answers in false bonded ties, ignore well-being in the plight of dark vibes.
Our next presentation is Kyle Campbell reading his short story called The Monster.
Okay. First, I would like to thank you for having me here tonight. There is so much that I want to say and so much that I wish I could say. But with 4 minutes and 50 seconds remaining, I'll have to make do with what I have. I'd like to read the opening sentence for what I wrote, and I invite you to speculate wildly as to what I might be referring to as I read. At this point, I'm obligated to warn you that my narration skills may need some work. In the dark lands we call home, there lives a creature, an unspoken horror left over from ages past. It possesses a terrible hunger for our kind. That's it. Now, I'm going to need you to trust me when I say that this is about adventure, not terror or mystery, and certainly not suspense. I know it seems pretty obvious from the opening line that I'm lying, but that's why I need you to trust me, a complete stranger. The story I wrote holds a special significance to me. In fact, equally as much as giving this speech does. But the reason for that significance is actually unrelated to either these words or the story that some of you have had the chance to read. As a piece of fiction, it is hardly literary genius. It is full of punctuation errors and misplaced nouns. So the question becomes, why is it so special to me? Well, because it's an adventure. Because it's about a bowl of cereal. Cheerios, to be exact. Well, you might be wondering, how on earth is a bowl of cereal an adventure? It all started 2 years ago, the day before this paper was due. I was helping a friend of mine write an essay for her English literature class. Her prompt was pretty simple. Write a story. About anything. That's it. But, understandably, she was having difficulty pinpointing what to write. As a perfectionist, she was concerned that whatever she wrote would be boring. Somehow she had convinced herself that she wouldn't be entertaining. So, trying to be helpful, I offered up the idea that anything can be entertaining, if you look at it the right way. I proclaimed that she can make even the most boring thing extraordinary, so long as she knew how to approach it. Naturally, she decided to think of the most boring thing possible and challenged me to make it remotely interesting. And that is how I came to write a story about a bowl of cereal. So, is our bowl of cereal about to go on an adventure? Maybe rescue some Lucky Charms from the clutches of an evil leprechaun? No. In fact, the story covers about what anyone would do with a bowl of cereal, pouring it in a bowl and eating it. So where's the adventure? Flash back to the night before my paper was due. I still hadn't written anything, but at least I had been given a prompt. I was on a mission to make a bowl of cereal interesting. It turns out that what I'd been preaching wasn't as easy as I just made it sound. In fact, at least not with a deadline a stone's throw away. At this point, I would like to share a secret that I've never spoken until now. I was afraid. Not only because this story would likely turn into a hastily made train wreck, but because yet again I found myself staring blankly at that evil blinking cursor on Microsoft Word. Its constant disappearing act making me envious. You see, this had been a pattern for me. As far back as I can remember, I'd always put off responsibilities in favor of having one more chance to hang out with friends, or one more chance to save a fictional land with fictional characters and a fictional problem. But time has a funny way of catching up with you. And with each tick of that clock, I could feel myself sink lower and lower into that same hopelessness I'd always felt. But today would prove very different. In a rare moment, I did something absolutely incredible. I rolled up my sleeves. I have short sleeves today. Can't do that. Strapped on my metaphorical boots, wearing sneakers, and told myself not to fail this time. I had to draw the line here, this far, and no further. And more importantly, I finally saw a reward in doing hard work, written across the faces of the students in my class who read my story. One guy even said it played like a movie in his head. I find it weird, but neat that I can make someone hallucinate like that. So, mile by mile, I started taking my first steps in an adventure I found far more grand and beautiful than anything I had seen in a video game. It hasn't been the easiest road, but I've been told that's true of all the best stories. Since then, I have completely changed paths in my career choice. I still write stories, and currently have 5 in need of some tender-loving editing, along with a book of ideas that I keep close. But I've turned my gaze towards the stars to work with bits of metal and wire in the hopes of one day reaching them. Put less poetically, I'm a computer engineer. So that is how an unwritten story became a bowl of cereal, and how a bowl of cereal became the beginning of an adventure. All I did was change your perspective, so when you read those same opening lines a second time, in the dark lands we call home, there lives a creature, an unspoken horror left over from ages past. It possesses a terrible hunger for our kind. You'll see it as an adventure, not a comedy masked as a horror story, and instead of a monster, you see a little kid enjoying some Cheerios. Thank you.
Next, we have an essay by Elaine Michael Cohens titled My Aunt Belle.
My name's Elaine. I take 2 emeritus writing classes, one with Susan Hecht and one with Patricia McFall. I was a teacher for 35 years, and I've published a book of my memoir. But when I got the email saying that my piece had been accepted to the wall, I jumped up and down and waved my hands in a very childish manner. This is about my Aunt Belle. My dad was one of 5 siblings. My Aunt Belle was the only girl. She became the matriarch of the family. Physically, she was an imposing figure. Although she was petite in height, she had a bosom that reached from Boston to LA. Thank you, Aunt Belle, for that gene. She worked at a very upscale women's boutique in downtown Boston. She always wore a black skirt with a crisscrossed black top, high heels, and her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She also wore big glasses with diamonds on the side and big jewelry. This all contributed to her imposing stature. According to her appearance, one would think her stern, but she had a heart as big as her bosom, and one trait which embarrassed all her brothers. My Aunt Belle had a potty mouth which would cause a sailor to blush. And for those who might be offended, I apologize. Her favorite epithet was one long word, son of a bitch bastard. She used it to express happiness and surprise, as well as sadness and anger. Her daughter once said of her, "My mother used the F word before it was fashionable." Un-effing believable. Aunt Belle brought home countless cashmere sweaters from her store as part of her sales commission. Her 4 sisters-in-law and her 3 nieces all had cashmere wardrobes. My parents both worked, and we had no money, but I went off to college with a drawer full of cashmere sweaters and a closet full of matching skirts. Un-effing believable. Aunt Belle was a great cook and made everything with real butter and real cream cheese and filled our arteries with gobs of cholesterol. That did not help our propensity for cholesterol-related ailments. She had a daughter who eventually passed away from cardiovascular disease and complications of diabetes. Her son passed away in his early 30s from kidney disease. Her daughter was beautiful and a talented dancer. Since she was 12 years older than I idolized her. In addition to showering all the nieces and one nephew with love, Aunt Belle also gave us many laughs. When my younger brother was about 5 years old, on one of our many visits to her house, she closed the door behind us, and my brother began to scream, "You closed the door on Dada May!" Aunt Belle opened the door, looked around, and saw nothing. She did not know that Dada May was my brother's imaginary friend. She guffawed with great joy and repeated that story for many years to come. Sometime in her early 70s, Aunt Belle had open heart surgery. We went to visit her when she came home, and she told us this story, which is etched in my memory. As she was being discharged from the hospital, the orderly weighed her and said aloud, 100 pounds. She looked at him and said for all the world to hear, "Are you crazy? One tit weighs 100 pounds." Uneffing believable. At this point, Aunt Belle was low on funds, but would never ask for help. One of my older cousins wrote to all the other cousins, and we all chipped in to keep her in a small but bright senior apartment. We were able to make sure it was furnished nicely and she could have a degree of comfort. Although she did not know the source of this largesse, we were all happy in the knowledge that we could finally give back.
And next we have a painting, a beautiful painting by Celia Wu, Celebration of the New Year 2013.
Professor Castle, Professor Sheffer, hello everyone. I'm so happy I'm the only one who is doing the paintings. Have you visited the supermarket lately? In the vegetable aisle, do you find oh sorry,
Gina,
tomatoes and bell peppers and onions? Their art. My professor did. What he did is he went to the local supermarket, bought some produce with a Persian teapot, some old box and fabric, and put some lights. Voila, it's the setting for a direct painting. You probably wonder, what is direct painting? Direct painting is actually on the canvas, you put wet paint, layers and layers, and it's done. It's also called alla prima in Italian, meaning your first attempt. So this type of painting, you have to work really fast. Okay, the painting, to do a painting is almost like write the poetry or a fine piece of music. They are very important elements. Here is the painting. I'm going to show you why it is a very nice painting. First of all, you will see all the lines. The leaks, actually, they're diagonal lines and horizontal lines, and the boxes is vertical lines. On this, all these objects, they all have beautiful shapes. The teapot is bulk, or the tomatoes, onions, and peppers, they're round shapes. How about the box? It's rectangular. So on this two-dimensional canvas, actually, they have three-dimensional image. So the lights come from the left-hand side and creates magic. All the drama comes. The light and shadow gives values. Do you feel that the teapot actually is made of metal? Metallic?
Yes.
And the wooden box is made of wood. So the texture is very, very important for this painting. All the bright colors like red and green, it's happy colors. It's celebration of the new year. But also there's contrast. The light and dark value, also the bright and dull. You can see the onion is really kind of a really dark color, and the background is very dark color. The reflection on the teapot is like some kind of dark or abstract things going on. Therefore, the color actually also gives you a sense of temperature, very bright, and so when everything tied up, all the elements in balance, and this painting is in unity. It's done. It's 6 to 8 hours, a direct painting is finished. So now I would like to thank you for being a wonderful audience, and my deep appreciation for Wall Magazine to create this beautiful artwork of the journal 2013. And I hope the celebration will keep on going until many, many years, although the years come to an end. But I hope to see you guys next year too. Thank you.
Next presenter is Alex Kustik, who served as the editor-in-chief of Wall Literary Journal. So he did an extraordinary job guiding the staff that produced this beautiful piece.
Anyways, I just want to thank Professor Schaefer and Professor Castle, and also the Wall staff. Some of you guys I recognize here today. Thank you all for coming out. And Wall is not about the editor-in-chief. It's not about me. It's about everyone else, because I couldn't do this on my own. It was a matter of their brilliance. I was just one of many, and I just want you all to know that this could not have been. We could not have this amazing journal without these two beautiful professors. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm
Now,
going to turn it over to...
Professor Schaefer is going to read for Alex.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that beautiful tribute, Alex. Alex's piece is titled Sweet Dreams. Metronome. Synced to her son's music playing in her head, each clomp of her heels keeps steady time on the cool tile hospital floor. Her new shoes. She couldn't resist bringing them to work today. As a nurse, Patty is subjugated to comfy, soft-soled white sneakers, plain old sneakers. It was time for a change, hence the shoes. They were flamboyant and bold, unlike the bland, sterile surroundings and routine at work. In a way, her son reminded her of her shoes, and she loved him for it. She could see his fingers gliding smoothly over the piano keys, striking each note with a divine tenderness and passion. Patty walks across the parking structure, gets in her '93 Toyota Corolla, and turns the key. Nothing. She curses and tries again. The old car gives a cough of protest, but turns over. As she makes her way home, Patty anticipates the concert that awaits her. She pictures his refined visage, topped with a lustrous mane of chestnut hair, vehemently swaying along with the music. I love my boy. When she nears the house, she rolls down the windows as usual to try and catch a note or two that might chance to waft her way. She listens. No music. Patty pulls into the driveway, ears straining, then sits for a moment, just waiting. Silence. Brows furrowed, she gets out of the car and trots up to the door, ignoring the pain in her feet from her new heels. As she fumbles for the key, the door flies open, revealing her husband, Mike, standing framed in the doorway. His strained expression gives way to one of fear as he centers his gaze upon her. Alarmed, Patty asks, "What is it?" "It's Joe. I don't know where he is or what's happened to him. He never came home from class this afternoon. I've called over and over again, but no answer." "What?" Her chest tightens with panic as the reality of what he is saying sinks in. Then she flings herself into Mike's arms, letting her tears run freely. "There, there," he says softly. "It's all right. I'll try calling him again." They go to the phone and dial. No response. Anxious, Patty grabs the receiver from Mike and begs Joe to call her back as soon as he gets the message. It's getting so hard to protect him now that he's in college. Head swimming, she staggers into the living room and collapses onto the dusty sofa in a dead swoon. She awakes with a start. Blinking, she looks around, willing her eyes to adjust to the darkness. A creak of a floorboard. Heart pounding, Patty edges off the couch and onto the floor. It must be an intruder. She clumsily crawls on her hands and knees over to her purse and reaches inside. She feels around until her hand closes on the syringe. A thin-lipped smile spreads across her face. Another creak, this time close to the stairs. Like a cat, Patty tiptoes across the living room to the sound. A black mass appears before her. She lets out a war cry and plunges the needle into the intruder's neck. The dark figure whirls around and dopily reaches for the attacker before falling to the floor with a terrible sound. Patty? Lights flip on and Mike comes rushing down the stairs. What in the world? Patty, adrenaline gone, looks up at her husband with a pale face. The syringe falls from her fingers and clatters on the floor. Joe, what did you do to him? He looks down at the syringe next to his son's head. And what's that? Patty, surprised at her own composure, calmly states, It's for my work. You injected him with something. I can't believe it. Mike starts visibly shaking. And look at his head. He's bleeding. He probably hit it on the stairs when he fell, she explains. I didn't know it was him. Mike rushes up the stairs and asks over his shoulder, What did you inject him with? Patty waves him off, saying, It's just an anesthetic. He'll come around in a couple hours. He gasps, An anesthetic? What are you doing with that? I always carry it in case I'm attacked. I thought Joe was a robber or something. Patty casts an anxious look at her husband. Where are you going? I'm going to put on a shirt and drive my son to the emergency room. You can't do that. I'll lose my job if they find out about the anesthesia. Our son's dying. He crests the stairs and turns around. Don't just stand there. Help stop his bleeding. Patty kneels down and casts a glance up the stairs. Mike is gone. If she's going to protect Joe, she has to protect herself. Determined, she gets up and runs to the kitchen. Pulling a knife out of the drawer, she quickly returns to Joe's side.
We have the short story Keys to Freedom by Ann Coffey.
Wait to hear Claire's interpretation on this coming-of-age story. First, I want to thank everyone for the wall, Alex, all of you all. And I think Saddleback is just a fabulous school. I'm with the Emeritus program. And Claire, have at it. Okay.
My parents bought me a piano when I was 6 years old. My father would accompany me by playing along on his harmonica, and my mother would make requests. The piano was an old upright that was of massive proportion. It looked and felt sturdy, being made of solid wood in a rich cognac color, changing from black to brownish tones depending on how the sunlight bounced off its lofty surfaces. It had been shellacked into a high gloss many times over, standing a good 6 feet in height. The piano covered a major part of one wall in our den, devouring all other objects in the room. The keys were a direct contrast. They were a dull ivory with a gray-yellowish tint, much like a row of large decayed teeth. It was an old Baldwin piano, circa 1914 or thereabouts. My parents spent $75 on it. With inflation, that would be around $525 today. Certainly an investment for their middle child. We found the old upright down in a dusty basement, in a dimly lit corner of the Dallas Original Piano and Music Store. We were told its first home had been somewhere in Colorado. Decades later, it found its way to Texas via the Santa Fe Railroad. I was sure it had been owned by the unsinkable Molly Brown, or maybe it had been played in an old Western saloon, since it had the blended odor of stale cigarettes and beer. The piano came with a long, hard piano bench. That's how you say piano, okay. Where my friends and I would sit for hours, hammering out and singing our favorite tunes. When played, the keys rang a bit tinny, and two did not produce any sound at all. The highest notes occasionally would produce a ping or a flat tone, as though not connected to the rest. Overall, it had a charming early Americana pitch, somewhere between vaudeville and a Scott Joplin jazzy sound. I loved that piano. However, I remember being required to practice at least an hour every day, which took me away from my friends in the afternoons. I began to feel stifled, resentful. By the time I was 10, my friends trumped practice and it began to show.
In our house, most things were on the honor system. My siblings and I were latchkey kids. We were on our own until our parents came home from work. We had a lot of freedom in our early on in our lives, and were expected to make rational decisions about everyday matters. My mother would declare, "With freedom comes responsibility." She expected certain things from us. From me, it was to master the keyboard with integrity and through self-daily discipline. Due to my tattling siblings and lower marks, my mother discovered that I was not practicing. She informed me that for every hour I missed of practice, I was to practice 2. She enforced this rule on the first day of summer break, rationalizing that I would have more hours to practice. I began to hate my piano. This big black thing was dominating my life. I would sit and look at the keys in disgust, wanting desperately to be free from its massive embrace. One day, I decided my piano needed a facelift, reasoning that if it looked better, I would play better. It was my piano. No one else played it, and I could do what I wanted with it, right? Without telling a soul, I took some of my babysitting money and rode my bike to the local paint store and picked out my favorite color, sunny side up yellow. I felt the freedom of this decision move over me like a paintbrush. I was happy and determined. That night, I hid the paint cans in my closet. The following day, it was going to be the big makeover. Fortunately for me, there would be no prying eyes because my sister and brother were away at camp. As soon as my parents left for work, I covered the floor around the piano with newspapers so they wouldn't mess up the hardwood. I knew I would get in trouble for that. I began early, first opening the can, stirring the contents, and finally painting. It took me all day to cover every inch of that mighty sound machine. By 4 p.m., I was done. What was once the gorilla in the room was now a new fortress of shimmering yellow. I gulped. I gulped again, quite expecting to see feathers shooting from its piano pores. I froze, realizing it was too late now to have regrets. I only had an hour before my parents got home. I had to think and act quickly. Panic set in. I cleared all the papers, cleaned up the den, put the chicken and the potatoes in the oven for dinner, and began practicing madly. I chose only my best songs. I chose only the one that my parents loved. I heard the door open. I heard my mother say, something smells good. My heart was racing, and I was playing the best I'd ever played in my life. Dad began singing along with my mother, who was in the other room. Suddenly, everything went quiet, except for me, banging out the marching chords of the Marines' hymn. I could feel my parents' presence, their body heat just behind me. I kept playing, now singing loudly as though everything was normal. Quite unnaturally, both my parents began singing again. I turned around, cowardly looking up at them. They were trying hard not to laugh. My mother, semi-serious, semi-not, had only one request. She asked if I would play On the Sunny Side of the Street. I turned back to the piano, not knowing whether to faint or cry, but robotically obliged. Not another word was uttered about that piano that night, except for the obvious question of why yellow. I did not have a good answer. I know now that it was about spreading my wings, flying to the sun and back, knowing I might get burned. Years later, when all of us had left our parents' proverbial nest and were discovering what the real cost of freedom entails, my parents decided to sell the yellow piano. They put an ad in the newspaper and immediately were swarmed with calls. Old Yellow was sold for $250 in less than 24 hours. My mother always said it was because it was yellow. Occasionally, I'll think about that sweet old piano and wonder what became of it. I hope there's another young girl somewhere, and she's learning to find her freedom among those keys in her own pursuit of happiness. Our last piece of the evening is titled Experimentation by Sterling Arthur Leva, and appropriately enough, it's about literature.
Yeah. Good evening, my name's Sterling. I'm exceedingly nervous and sorely out of practice, so I've decided to make this ordeal easier on myself. I'm picturing all of you in the nude right now. It's working, but I wouldn't suggest you do the same to me unless you don't want to sleep tonight or ever again. This poem does have a bit to do with literature. It also concerns finding my voice and nearly killing myself in the process. It's called Experimentation. I've experimented with a lot of things in my day. I mainlined romanticism and heard Genesis in a creaky, quiet, singing voice in Oakland, although the slim staccato said it was Dakota. I took a shot of surrealism and dallied with the daguerreotypical dandies as if it were 1931, and I was the only one who couldn't read the hands of the crooked clocks, pointing post-haste towards a past, purgatorial, pointillist punishment, all polka dots and sunspots. I freebased existentialism and spent many an ethereal evening evoking egotistical poltergeists and fishing for cracked psyches in the carpeted psychoses of an existence that wasn't entirely mine, but not entirely not mine either. I downed modernism like the last dregs from a Parisian wine not suitable for modern times, and lo and behold, it just made me whine and laugh all the way to the left bank. I tried transcendentalism and saw transcendent beauty in a pair of tarnished transvestite eyes on the corner of Turk and Taylor, with a tailored truth trying to be female, downing ale to forsake the male. Then I racked a rail of realism and really regretted the rush, man. Ain't nothing rawer than realizing that reality is realer than the most ravaging night terrors. Sturm und Drang made me strong and drunk, and I still can't figure out whether or not I sold my soul to the devil. But I do have a diabolical contract lying around here somewhere. I bought some beat poetry off a beat junkie off Skate and Thrashberry, but the words beat me down like a sad, sad clown until I forged my own mental Coney Island. I was starving, hysterical, but never naked, so I took the tempo and the credo and put it in my pants pocket for my own cruel devices. I've been achy for aestheticism and dope sick for Dadaism after I got a taste from a tasteless turncoat in Orinda. It all seemed Shakespearean to me, but it was mostly beer and shakes as far as I could see. Now I'm sniffing sentimentalism and seeing stars, and literary schools are like classic cars. They look real radical from afar, but try to buy one and you won't get far. Thank you.
That concludes our presentation. Thank you so much to the wonderful authors and artists.